My sister demanded my income and Dad told me to leave. I canceled his mortgage and used his illegal paper trail to annihilate them. By 8:32 p.m., on New Year's Eve, I was standing in my dad's oppressive, mahogany-paneled dining room in Portland, Oregon, staring down at a cold plate of prime rib and a half-empty glass of cheap grocery store champagne. My sister was sitting across from me, acting like she had a legal right to my paycheck. I'm Maya. I'm 35, a systems architect at a mid-sized tech firm, and for the entirety of my adult life, I have been the designated emergency fund for this family. Whenever something broke, whenever a poor decision was made, whenever reality caught up with their delusions, my phone rang. A blown car transmission, a sudden rent shortfall, an exorbitant private school fee for my niece, a tiny emergency that somehow always miraculously cost me 4 figures. That night, the dining table was suffocatingly crowded. My dad, Arthur, sat at the head of the table like a king holding court. My sister, Chloe, sat beside him, her husband Kyle aggressively chewing his food as if none of this conversation involved him. Chloe's 2 kids were literally throwing bread rolls at each other, knocking over water glasses while everyone smiled and called it high energy. My adopted status wasn't spoken out loud. Not usually. But in my family, it was the invisible elephant in every room, dictating every interaction. I was the child they generously took in. Chloe was the real one, the blood one, the one everyone adjusted their lives around. I had brought an expensive artisan dessert, 3 bottles of imported wine, and the mental burden of the envelope containing Dad's January mortgage transfer. He had texted me that morning, a message I had received 100 times before. Maya, need your help covering the gap again, just until the quarterly bonuses hit. Bonuses, plural. He had been using that exact phrase for almost 3 years. I was already paying a portion of their utilities every single month. I had covered Dad's expensive medication co-pays more times than I could count. I paid for Chloe's oldest daughter's elite gymnastics after-school program back in October when she got a little behind. In November, I paid a $2,750 emergency plumber bill, because the family home matters to all of us. In December, I sent $1,100 directly toward Dad's mortgage because he claimed the bank's foreclosure notices were getting aggressive. I knew the exact numbers because my brain does that when I'm stressed. It categorizes. It counts. Mortgage help in December, $1,100. Plumber, $2,750. Gymnastics fees for my niece, $420. Groceries because Chloe forgot to budget, $24,500 over the span of 3 years. Amazon orders for house basics, sent directly to Dad's place just last week, $215.40. I knew all of this because I had every single receipt saved in a hidden, encrypted folder on my phone simply titled, Family Debt. The kids were screaming. Chloe's youngest had mashed potatoes in his hair, and nobody even blinked. Kyle was on his 3rd IPA, and his 5th unsolicited opinion about the economy. Dad was in one of his sentimental, performative moods, which usually meant he was about to ask for something massive. Then, Chloe put down her fork. She wiped her mouth with a cloth napkin, leaned forward, and smiled at me. It was a cold, calculating smile, the kind of smile that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Maya, we should just say it clearly for the new year so there's no confusion, Chloe announced. The table went dead silent. Even the kids stopped throwing food. Your support now covers my kids and my household. Simple as that. For a split second, the room spun. I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Not because she mumbled, but because the words were so breathtakingly blunt, so dripping with entitlement, that they sounded like dialogue from a bad movie. I looked at Kyle first. He didn't look shocked. He just nodded once, like Chloe had just summarized a successful corporate merger. Then I looked at Dad. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't look apologetic or embarrassed. He lifted his champagne glass, took a slow sip, and pointed toward the front hallway. If you disagree, the door is right there. My mouth went completely dry. My brain started counting stupid, irrelevant things to keep me from screaming. 4 adults at the table. 2 kids in booster seats. 1 antique grandfather clock ticking way too loud. 1 mortgage payment of $1,100 scheduled to leave my checking account at exactly midnight. Chloe leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Maya, let's be real. You don't have kids. You don't have a husband. You make tech money. This helps all of us. All of us. That phrase. All of us. That phrase was the architect of half the traps in my life. I looked down the length of the table. Kyle suddenly found his plate fascinating and wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad wore that rigid, authoritative expression he always used when he was about to disguise cruelty as practicality. My stepmother, Helen, just kept meticulously cutting her meat as if she were completely deaf to the total collapse of basic human decency happening 2 feet away from her. Chloe's daughter looked at me, then quickly down at her lap. Even a 7-year-old could tell when the adults had crossed a massive, unforgivable line. I slowly set down my linen napkin. I kept my voice terrifyingly level. Perfect. Chloe blinked, her smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Excuse me? I said perfect. I'm gone. And you can start paying your own mortgage. Simple as that. Nobody moved. The silence was absolute. Then, Dad actually laughed. It was a short, ugly, dismissive sound. Maya, don't be dramatic. Sit down. I stood up. I was so calm it actually scared me. The shaking in my hands had completely stopped. I'm not being dramatic, Dad. I'm canceling the transfer. Chloe's entire face contorted. The smugness vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Maya, you wouldn't. I didn't argue. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, opened my banking app, and navigated to the scheduled transfers page. I held the screen up so they could all see the glowing interface. I hit Cancel Series. January mortgage transfer canceled at 8:36 p.m. I read aloud. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't deliver a tearful monologue about how much they had hurt me. I calmly walked over to the coat rack, picked up my wool trench coat, grabbed my car keys, and picked up the untouched artisan tart I had brought. I looked back at them one last time. You just confused access to me with ownership of me. And I walked out into the freezing Portland rain. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there with both hands gripping the steering wheel. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the streetlights. I didn't scream. I just opened that hidden folder on my phone, the one they didn't know existed. Because there was something else they were going to find out later, and it was going to cost them so much more than a missed mortgage payment. To understand how we got here, you have to understand the psychology of my family. I was adopted when I was 3 years old. Nice people hear that and say, "Oh, that's beautiful." Curious people ask, "Do you know your biological parents?" But my family weaponized it, not directly. Never in a way you could record and play back without sounding oversensitive. It was more like a high-pressure weather system you are forced to live inside. Chloe was your sister by chance. You were the blessing we chose, Dad used to say at dinner parties. It sounded incredibly sweet, until you grew up and realized that chosen translates to indebted, real fast. I learned very early on that endless gratitude was the currency expected from me. Chloe got grace. I got expectations. If Chloe forgot a bill, she was just overwhelmed. If I hesitated to pay it for her, I was selfish. If she needed help, family steps up. If I needed space, I was being cold. I bought a small, 2-bedroom condo when I was 30. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet place with a tiny balcony, a view of a wet parking lot, and 3 stubborn pine trees. But it was mine. And that independence threatened Dad more than I understood at the time. The morning after the New Year's Eve dinner, I woke up to exactly 14 text messages. Dad, call me immediately. Chloe, you embarrassed me in front of my children. You are toxic. Helen, Maya, dear, this can all still be fixed if you just calm down and apologize. Kyle, you completely overreacted, Maya. It was just a conversation. Dad, again, the mortgage is due on the 3rd. Stop being childish, and send the money. I made a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and replied to exactly one text. In the family group chat, I wrote, I am no longer paying any expenses for your house or Chloe's household. Do not ask again, the bank is closed. Dad responded in under 30 seconds. After everything we did for you. We took you in when nobody else wanted you. There it was. The adoption debt, finally unwrapped and slammed on the table. I didn't answer. Wave 1 of their retaliation was pure, unadulterated guilt. Calls I ignored. Voicemails about family unity. Helen leaving me voice notes in that soft, dangerous whisper she used to manipulate situations. Nobody is saying you owe anyone forever, Maya, but your father is old-fashioned. He sees family wealth as collective. Collective, of course, always meant money flowing in one direction, away from me. Then came the second wave, the practical wave. And this is where the story goes from a toxic family dispute to a literal crime. A week later, I was sitting at my desk at work running system diagnostics when my personal email pinged. It was an automated alert from my bank asking me to confirm a home equity line of credit, HELOC, inquiry. A $150,000 inquiry. I never submitted an application. I definitely never submitted one tied to Dad's address. My stomach completely dropped. I immediately called the fraud department, then my personal banker. The application had been started online using my exact personal information. My full name, my date of birth, my income bracket, my social security number, and employment details that were terrifyingly accurate. It wasn't complete, and it wasn't successful, but it was close enough to make me feel physically sick. The loan officer on the phone told me the application was abandoned because the system requested more supporting documentation and didn't receive it. Requested where? I asked, my voice shaking. The prompt was sent to arthur.anderson@email.com, the banker replied. I asked for every single digital timestamp they could legally provide me. January 8, 2:14 p.m. Inquiry submitted. 2:17 p.m. Documents requested. 2:21 p.m. Abandoned. I hung up, walked into an empty conference room, and called Dad. He picked up on the first ring, probably thinking I was calling to apologize and hand over my wallet. Did you use my social security number and personal information for a $150,000 loan inquiry? I asked, skipping hello. He laughed. A short, nervous chuckle. That was his tell. Maya, don't accuse me of crimes just because you're in a mood. Answer the damn question, Dad. I was simply seeing what options existed. The bank requires a cosigner for the equity line, and since you're part of this family, I actually had to sit down in the rolling chair. With my information? Without my consent? It's all family property, Maya. If you had just helped pay the mortgage like you were supposed to, none of this would be necessary. I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something permanent inside me just snapped. He didn't view me as a daughter. He viewed me as an asset. A line of credit with a heartbeat. That was the exact moment I stopped arguing and started documenting for real. I am a systems architect. When a system is compromised, you isolate the breach, freeze the network, and pull the logs. Rage doesn't make me messy. It makes me terrifyingly organized. I spent the next 48 hours pulling every credit report from Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. I froze everything. I filed a police information report, followed by a formal identity theft and fraud report after my bank strongly advised it. I printed out my transfer history going back 36 months. I exported every text message. I built a master timeline. But the real shock, the thing that made me realize I was dealing with actual sociopaths, came when I started digging into property records. The bank officer had asked me if I had any formal, legal connection to Dad's property. I told him no. But to be safe, I went online and searched the county parcel details. I expected to find nothing. Instead, I found a recorded document filed 2 years ago. Dad had drafted a transfer on death deed. Originally, my name had been on it. Then, 2 years ago, it was updated. My name was completely removed, replaced entirely by Chloe's. But that wasn't the bad part. The bad part was a secondary filing attached to a county correction notice. It was titled, Private Family Reimbursement Agreement. I had never seen this document in my life. I had certainly never signed it. I drove straight to the county recorder's office on my lunch break, paid the $15 fee, and got physical copies. I sat in my car in the rain, reading it page by page. There was no forged signature from me, which was almost worse. Dad had simply drafted and filed his own internal paper trail, signing it himself, as if his signature alone was enough to legally rewrite reality. He had been building a fictitious legal narrative. The document claimed that my ongoing financial contributions were not gifts, not loans, and not emergency help. It categorized them as voluntary occupancy-related obligations. Occupancy? I hadn't lived in that house since I was 22. The document explicitly stated that the house was a shared family arrangement, and that Chloe's occupancy and her children's needs were anticipated under prior verbal discussions with Maya. Prior discussions, my ass. Then, I found the line that actually made me laugh out loud. Alone, in a cold parking lot. Adoptive daughter Maya Anderson acknowledges a moral commitment to household continuity and financial stabilization. A moral commitment. Written in pseudo-legal English by a man trying to legally bind me to his debt. They thought they had emotional leverage. What they actually had was a fraudulent paper trail. And paper trails work both ways. I hired an attorney on January 14th. I didn't hire a loud, dramatic TV lawyer. I hired a quiet, lethal civil litigation attorney named Sarah, who wore sharp navy suits and didn't waste words. She flipped through my meticulously tabbed binder in under 20 minutes. Did you ever live in the property during the period these payments were made? Sarah asked. No, I said. Did you authorize any credit inquiry, HELOC application, or use of your SSN? No. Did you ever sign or verbally agree to this moral commitment nonsense? Absolutely not. Sarah nodded once, closed the binder, and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. Good. Then we stopped letting them narrate this story. We are going to bury them in paperwork. Within a week, Sarah's office sent 3 things via certified mail. 1. A formal cease and desist, regarding the use of my identity. 2. A demand to preserve documents, anticipating litigation. 3. A formal notice, disputing any claim that my past payments were obligations, tenancy-related, or binding. Then, Sarah told me to do one controlled thing myself. She drafted a single sentence. She told me to send it, screenshot it, and ignore the fallout. At Neo. Trey. A. On a Monday, I dropped this into the family group chat. Effective immediately. Do not use my name, income, credit, or prior financial support in connection with your mortgage, household, or any application for funds. All future communication goes through my legal counsel. Dad called in under 10 seconds. I declined it. Chloe called next. Declined. Helen. Kyle. Declined. Declined. Dad showed up at my condo that evening. I was cooking dinner when the aggressive pounding started. Not a normal knock. Hard, furious, open-handed pounding that made the doorframe rattle. Maya, open this goddamn door, his voice boomed through the wood. You do not send lawyers after your own family. I had already installed a Ring camera the day after I discovered the loan inquiry. I stood in my hallway, watching him on my phone screen. He looked unhinged, his face was red, his coat was soaked from the rain, and he was pacing around my welcome mat like a caged animal. I pressed the microphone button on the app. Leave my property immediately, Arthur. He slammed his fist against the door again. You ungrateful little bitch. I put a roof over your head. I gave you a name. He stopped screaming because he suddenly saw the flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement of the parking lot. I had called the police non-emergency line the exact second he refused to leave. 2 Portland police officers walked up the stairs. They were calm, professional, and entirely unimpressed by Dad's sudden attempt to look like a respectable, misunderstood patriarch. Dad immediately did what manipulative men always do when authority enters the room. He softened his voice, slumped his shoulders, and tried to sound like a wounded, loving father dealing with a hysterical daughter. Officers, it's just a family misunderstanding. My daughter is going through a tough time, and we're just trying to talk. I opened the door exactly 2 inches, leaving the chain locked. Officers, this man attempted to open a $150,000 line of credit using my stolen social security number. He has been served a cease and desist. I want him trespassed from my property. The older officer turned to Dad. This was the moment that ended it all. The officer asked the only question that mattered. Sir, did she authorize the use of her personal information for a loan? Dad started rambling about context. Well, you see, the house is a family asset, and we have an internal agreement regarding household continuity. Sir, the officer interrupted, his voice hardening. Yes or no? Dad swallowed hard. He looked at the cops, then looked at the crack in my door. Not exactly. Not exactly. It was the most devastating, pathetic admission I had ever heard. The officer stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then, he unclipped his radio, took a step closer to Dad, and explained the trespass warning language so plainly, so aggressively, that even Dad couldn't pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. If you return to this address, you will be arrested. If you contact her outside of her legal counsel, it will be documented for a restraining order. Do you understand? Dad left. He looked pale, furious, and suddenly very old. 2 days later, Chloe tried her own desperate tactic. Since she couldn't come to my house, she showed up at my tech firm. I was in the middle of a sprint planning meeting when my phone buzzed with a message from the front desk. Your sister is here in the lobby. She's demanding to see you and is causing a bit of a scene. I didn't go down. I called Marcus, our head of building security. I explained that an estranged family member was trespassing and I felt unsafe. 5 minutes later, I watched from the second-floor glass atrium as Marcus and another guard politely but firmly escorted a screaming Chloe out of the revolving glass doors. She was shouting about how I was starving her children. She texted me a photo of her kids standing in the rain looking sad, with the caption, "Hope your pride was worth hurting them over. You are a monster." I took a screenshot, forwarded it to Sarah without comment, and blocked Chloe's number forever. The irreversible step came the following week. I spent an entire Saturday changing every remaining shared point of access in my life. I purged my emergency contacts. I deleted old account recovery emails. I reviewed my life insurance beneficiaries, making sure everything was left to a charity. I updated my HR file at work, changed my credit freeze pins, and even changed the entry code to my building. I completely erased my digital footprint from their lives. And because my lawyer, Sarah, was a shark who knew exactly where to smell blood, we pushed the bank's internal fraud complaint process to the absolute limit. We formally subpoenaed the IP address and documentation logs from the abandoned HELOC application. The results were chilling. The bank confirmed that the inquiry was initiated from Dad's home IP address. But worse, we discovered how he got my exact income figures. He had uploaded a PDF to the bank's portal to try and prove my income. It was an old insurance comparison document I had emailed to Helen 3 years ago when she was helping me compare dental plans. That document had my exact salary, my SSN, and my employment history on it, which meant this wasn't confusion. It wasn't an accident. It was calculated, intentional identity theft, facilitated by my stepmother keeping my documents. The absolute second Sarah forwarded that evidence to Dad's newly hired, panicked defense attorney, the entire tone of the war shifted. There were no more lectures about family unity. There were no more guilt trips about my adoption. Suddenly, they were absolutely terrified. Helen ambushed me at a local coffee shop near my office. She literally jumped out of her SUV and tried to hand me a cheap, ugly silver locket that belonged to Dad's mother. "Maya, please, this is a family heirloom. Surely we don't want permanent damage over a silly paperwork error. We can resolve this privately." I didn't take the locket. I looked at her and said, "Permanent damage is what you do to a bank account. What you did to me is a felony. Speak to my lawyer." I walked away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk holding the cheap necklace. "You're taking this too far," she screamed after me. Too far is what abusers say when consequences finally arrive at their own front door. The funny thing is, peace is incredibly boring. That's how you know it's real. By March, my life had gotten smaller, quieter, and infinitely better. I went to work. I came home. I cooked complex meals for myself, without obsessively checking my phone for manufactured emergencies that belonged to other adults. I put my bonus into my own savings account, and actually watched the number grow instead of immediately transferring it to fix someone else's mistake. I bought a new couch. A ridiculous, expensive, emerald green velvet sectional. Not because of some deep symbolism, but simply because my old one hurt my back, and for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't sacrificing my own basic comfort to subsidize Chloe's chaos. My best friend, Tasha, came over one Friday night, with boxes of spicy Thai takeout. She sat cross-legged on that green velvet couch, eating pad ki mao, while I read her the latest email update from Sarah. "So let me get this straight," Tasha said, pointing a chopstick at me. "They treated you like a sentient ATM, legally tried to claim your salary as their own, committed light treason with your social security number, and then got completely shocked when the ATM hired a shark lawyer and called the cops?" I laughed so hard I almost choked on my noodles. At work, my lack of constant stress paid off. In April, I was promoted to senior systems architect. It came with a massive pay bump and stock options. I almost missed the email from HR because I was so conditioned to other people's crises drowning out my own milestones. I didn't tell a single member of my family. I celebrated by ordering a $100 dry-aged steak to my apartment, and eating it in total, luxurious silence. Good silence. Expensive. Feeling silence. Dad and Chloe both tried one final, pathetic pass at reconciliation as the legal walls closed in on them. For my birthday, Dad mailed a card to my office. There was no apology written inside. Just a check for $250 and a sticky note that read, "For everything getting out of hand, let's move on. Les." I didn't cash it. I mailed it back directly to his lawyer via certified mail. Chloe, completely unhinged by the fact that she now had to actually budget her own life, managed to circumvent my blocks by emailing me from a newly created address. She sent a collage of photos of her kids looking sad, with a long rambling caption about how family shouldn't stay divided over silly financial misunderstandings. Misunderstanding? Like she hadn't proudly announced that my income was her household infrastructure over a plate of roast potatoes and sparkling cider. I replied once, exactly once. "I am not available for financial exploitation disguised as family love. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked that email address too. As for the legal side, nothing cinematic happened. There was no explosive courtroom speech, no dramatic collapse on a witness stand. Just relentless, suffocating paperwork, forced admissions, and the kind of ugly, quiet settlements that toxic families make when they realize the calm one kept flawless records. Faced with the undeniable proof of the IP address logs and the stolen insurance PDF, Dad's lawyer advised him to surrender completely to avoid me pushing for criminal fraud charges. Dad had to formally, legally withdraw any claimed reliance on my financial support. He had to sign a legally binding declaration, drafted by Sarah, stating that the private family reimbursement agreement was completely fabricated, null, and void, and that I owed them absolutely nothing. That document mattered to me more than any amount of money. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see him in handcuffs. I just needed the absolute truth pinned down on legal paper where they couldn't twist it, manipulate it, or wiggle it into some softer shape later. I was never obligated. I was never legally responsible for Chloe's household. I was never the backup mortgage plan just because they unilaterally declared it over dinner. And being adopted did not make me an open line of credit in exchange for the privilege of belonging to them. That was the real thing they found out later, not just that I had the spine to leave, but that I had the proof to destroy their narrative. And undeniable proof is very inconvenient for people who survive by rewriting the story. Now, when co-workers or acquaintances ask whether I speak to my family, I don't give them the polite, socially acceptable answer. I tell the truth. Not really. I speak to my lawyer if I need to. I speak to myself a lot more kindly than I used to. I trust my own reality. And I speak up a hell of a lot faster the second someone starts confusing love with entitlement. Because that is the absolute moral of this story, if there is one. The people who benefit the most from your silence, your guilt, and your endless sacrifices will always be the first ones to call your boundaries cruel. They will call you selfish, for finally putting up a fence around your own life. Let them call you cruel, let them call you selfish. Set the boundary anyway. Protect your peace, freeze your credit, and keep the receipts. Because access to you is a privilege, not a family right.